And we are live with why every accountant should look at e-commerce as a niche. And I'm honored to be joined by Parag Mamnani. Thank you, Parag, for taking time out.
Of course, yeah. Thank you for having
really,
me.
I'm really excited about this. So, right off the bat, I wanted to kick this off with a poll question because for those of you who are here in attendance right now, this will help us to understand the answers. So you should see the poll coming up on your screen. The question is, how much experience do you have? And of course, we mean specifically e-commerce experience. So would you say I have no experience and want to learn more? Some experience, I'm very experienced and still want to learn more.
Yeah,
So
it's a great way to kick things off. Level set on where everyone is, and hopefully we can get everything tailored to your needs.
yeah, definitely. And meanwhile, give it another minute for the poll results. And just in case anybody's wondering, and before you ask, unfortunately, no, there's no CPE. We're just doing the poll for our own information, literally. And I'm going to get organized here. Okay, I'm going to end the poll in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So actually, it's a close tie between having some experience and no experience, about almost 50-50 each, and a small percent, 3% said, I'm very experienced, but still want to learn more. So I'm sharing the results so all of you can see. So we're about mixed, Parag. Let's just assume basically nobody is very experienced, and we got about a 50-50 split between people
Great.
with just some and with none. So basically, I think it's a safe bet for us to just assume as we go through this that we're dealing with people who have zero experience, and hopefully it won't be too boring for the people who have some experience, but I don't think it will. I think we're going to be good.
Yeah, absolutely. No, it's great to know kind of where everyone is so we can calibrate. But yeah, we'll definitely err more on the side of sharing, I guess, more basics and how to get everybody going.
Yeah. Yep. We'll just assume. And of course, folks, if you have questions, best thing to do is use the Q&A, because the chat obviously will have, banter in there. We'll have people talking. I just saw the comment about Jeopardy. That's funny. And we have a second person hailing all the way from Ireland, which is awesome.
I have to say, you have a very lively audience. I
Yeah.
can tell from the banter already.
I invited them. I think just before you got on, I asked people to chime in and let us know where they're from. It's always fun. Um, so yeah, and I just think it's so cool that we have two people from the same part of Ireland. Um,
Welcome.
so welcome. Maybe at some point I'll give some e-commerce accounting instruction in my best Irish accent. That was probably terrible. Um, so anyway, why every accountant should look at e-commerce as a niche. If any of you saw some of the, sort of stuff that we posted online about this, you probably have a sense of what we're going to talk about today, right? We're going to talk about the fact that a lot of people going into this assume that e-commerce is very complicated because we're dealing with inventory and sales tax and some other things that we'll talk about. My goal today, by the end of this webinar, is for you to have the belief, as I expect to convey, that it's not actually complicated. It's detailed, but not complicated. In other words, all of you are more than smart enough, right? If you're in here, if you're a bookkeeper, if you're already doing bookkeeping of any kind, you're smart enough to understand this stuff. It's really, I think, just a matter of being willing to and understanding the benefits so that you have the desire to learn something like this. And the reasons, the compelling reason I think we're going to lay out for you today are really based on the fact that there's a huge opportunity here because when I say that the e-commerce market for bookkeepers is not mature, it probably sounds counterintuitive because you're thinking, how could he say it's not mature? It's been around for a long time. It's grown so much. And that's true. But when I say it's not mature, I mean, there still aren't a lot of accounting professionals serving the market, which means in that regard, it's not a mature market, which means there's an opportunity for you here. If you want to go in, as most bookkeepers do, especially when they're starting out, and get into a simple service-based type niche, then you're probably entering into a very mature market where there are a lot of people, serving those markets, which means it's going to be harder for you to get clients. And obviously, that's a common thing I see is a lot of bookkeepers struggling to get clients. And when I ask what you're specializing in, it's usually the more generalist type stuff. And of course, it's no secret then why it's hard to find clients, right? So we talk about how to pick a niche, right? And, I have this, everybody should be able to see this on their screens now, right? My how to pick a niche slide,
Yep.
right? And, and the thing is, you hear about this all the time. You got to find a niche, you got to specialize, but how and where? And if I'm just starting out, how can I possibly know? And, one thing I've been saying to, newcomers recently about this is when you're brand new, such that you haven't had any experience to figure out what niche you should pick, then your first niche is going to be those small micro businesses that can't afford rates of experienced bookkeepers, but need somebody to do the bookkeeping, many of whom are thinking, I got to do this myself because there's no way I can afford somebody. But if you're brand new, you can kind of fly under the radar in terms of rates and get in there and get those clients and then grow with them and they grow with you. And actually, before we went live, John and I were talking a little bit about this, that a lot of people would probably not expect even that opportunity to exist in the e-commerce world, but it definitely exists. There are a lot of people selling on small platforms, like not that Etsy is a small platform, but Etsy, from what I've seen, caters to the smaller e-commerce business, like artistic types who are selling candles and whatever else they, like basically crafts, people make their own stuff and sell it on Etsy. So I think there's a huge opportunity still, even for the brand new bookkeeper, to find the brand new e-commerce merchant who is just as small in their sense as you might be in the bookkeeping sense. What do you think, Parag?
Oh yeah, absolutely. It's spot on. I think when I talk to accountants, and I've been doing this now 2 decades, and most bookkeepers, accountants, it used to be they didn't even want to touch it, right? And to me, what's really happened over the last, I would say, 5 years or so is that there has been a maturity in the marketplace as regards to how standardized some things have become and how you can tackle e-commerce customers. And obviously, we've been around a while, and our software's been around for a while to help accountants and bookkeepers too. But I think when I think about what really is kind of the roadblock for most bookkeepers or accountants to jump into e-commerce, I think there's just this fear. Okay, there's this fear of dealing with too many transactions, right? So the volume of data can be overwhelming. I think the second is sales tax, and I know we're going to get into some of these in later on, but the volume of transactions, the sales tax, and then inventory, right? These are, I think, the three most common things I hear why most bookkeepers, accountants are kind of afraid or hesitant, if you will, to get into the e-commerce space. And I think this is all a solvable problem, right? It's already been solved. And so the folks that have kind of been able to understand that, embrace it, and pick that niche, I think have seen tremendous amount of success. Yeah, we're excited to, I guess, share more insights, especially with your awareness of the market and all the bookkeepers.
Right, right. And so again, just to kind of recap what we've said so far already, you can follow a common path of simple service-based accounting, and you're going to be in a mature market, meaning that you have a lot of people serving that niche, which is going to make it harder to find clients. That's the road most traveled, right? What I'm suggesting here right off the bat is that any of you who aren't sure yet if you wanted to do e-commerce, that this is a huge opportunity for you because again, high demand in terms of merchants needing people to serve them as accountants and bookkeepers, short supply in terms of not a lot of accountants and bookkeepers are out there willing or frankly able, and by able, I just mean because they haven't taken the time to learn it because they don't want to, because it's difficult. Right. So we have a short supply of accounting and bookkeeping professionals. Now add to that the fact that we're seeing fewer and fewer people than ever entering the accounting industry. So that is going to widen this gap even further as time goes on, at least in the near term, until that turns around. Now, we've got a question in the chat, in the Q&A, Parag. I'm curious what your answer to this is. Catherine says, I'm hearing ecom has had a down dip in recent months. Do you think it's just a dip or will it come back up?
Well, it's funny the way that it's articulated, because e-commerce has actually not had a dip. It's really just when you look at it relative to what happened during the COVID years. So On a year-over-year basis is where you're seeing the sort of comps slightly dip. In fact, they're just flatlining. But if you look at the trajectory overall of percentage of e-commerce transaction happening around the world as a total of retail, I mean, we're sitting at a healthy 15, 16% of all transactions. And that trajectory is actually unchanged over the last 5 years or so. It's continuing to grow. So yes, relative to the I guess the pull in of demand that happened during the COVID years, as most businesses who maybe had a 5 year roadmap of when they were going to take their brick and mortar business online, they were suddenly faced with shutdowns. And so they didn't have a choice, right? They couldn't wait. And so a lot of businesses ended up pulling their roadmaps in, launching e-commerce businesses or their e-commerce sales channels earlier. So in 2020 through 22, we saw this massive acceleration. So we really sort of saw the curve spike up with lots of new entrants into e-commerce. And clearly, if we were not shopping in person, we were also buying more online. So a lot of the existing e-commerce businesses also saw a pretty dramatic pull-in of demand. So yes, relative to 2020, 2021, we're not seeing the same rate of year-over-year growth. But as a whole, in absolute terms, e-commerce continues to be growing steadily and taking up a lion's share of what are retail transactions. And most people that start to shop online are not about to go back, right? You're just seeing, I think now, a settling in of, what consumer behavior was during the pandemic. Everybody was at home and isolating and buying online. Now you're starting to see that even out a little bit, where you're now going back to the malls, you're going back to your brick and mortar retailers to really touch and feel and get a chance to experience the products. But e-commerce shopping is still is here to stay. And in fact, it's only accelerating with regards to the categories in which people are buying, right? I mean, you're seeing, large retailers go out of business, in fact, in their brick and mortar presence, because consumers who weren't comfortable buying, say, for example, large furniture online, they're now much more comfortable doing it. And, fulfillment and supply chains have also kind of normalized. So again, I would not be worried even for a second about there being a slowdown or a decline. It's just, things are shaking out the way they are post-pandemic right now.
Yeah. And I'll say this, I mean, as far as I recall from what I read near the end of last year, we still exceeded $1 trillion in e-commerce.
Indeed, we did.
On the whole.
We absolutely did.
And that was, a record high. So it makes total sense. The reality is, I think that e-commerce is something that you're going to see expanding in ways you might not even be thinking about. Think of your own businesses as bookkeepers and accountants. If you are not by now, you probably should have the ability to have people pay you through your website, right, for your services. You should, if you're doing value or subscription-based pricing, you should definitely be able to set up that subscription through your website. It's so easy to do nowadays. You can do it with just Stripe even. Stripe lets you go in and create subscriptions and invoice people, and it does a beautiful job. Stripe's got a beautiful interface. One of maybe my favorite sort of payment processing solution out there for a lot of reasons. So the other thing is, Linda, I saw your question earlier, by the way. It looks like you might have taken it away. Or maybe I accidentally marked the answer, but we'll talk.
I answered it, just FYI.
Oh, no problem. So, okay, so that's fine. So you mean about how well Webgility integrates with QBO Plus?
Yes, and for the record, so everybody knows, it is one of our target demographics for Webgility Online, so it will work, no issues.
Right. Now, then the next question we have is that e-commerce is a very broad space. Wouldn't there be a benefit to specialize further down within e-commerce to say fashion and apparel or pet supplies? In my opinion, the more narrow you can define your niche, in other words, the more narrowly you can define your target audience, the better. Because while the fear is you're not casting a wide net, so you're not going to get a lot of customers, the reality is the more narrowly you define that niche, the more magnetic the attraction when you go out there and you create your messaging and write copy for your website and do videos on YouTube or Instagram or whatever you're doing. The language that's going to naturally be infused in your messaging is going to reflect that narrowed down niche, which, like I said, is going to have a magnetic like attraction. So definitely suggest doing that, especially if you're at a place where you already know for sure. As I often like to mention, if you're newer, you may not have had the experience yet that you need to, as far as being able to figure out how to narrow it down that far. One common example I've noticed, which I love in terms of why somebody might know right out of the gate, is based on something that's personal to them, like pet supplies or pet related products. If you're an animal lover, and in fact, if you're like me, where I'm like a fanatic animal lover, I love my dogs more than most people on this planet. If I was going to look to do something, that might be where I would specialize. And in fact, it's well known, I recently sold off most of my accounting practice, but one of the clients that I kept is a client who is in the pet product related business. And that's one of the reasons, besides that I adore her and love working with her, her business itself is near and dear to my heart. So that's often a really good reason for choosing a niche, is basically something that you're really passionate about.
Yeah, and I'll just add one thing with regards to sort of e-commerce as a niche. I actually, not to be a contrarian, but I think every business is e-commerce, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'll just use the example of, my son goes to a Montessori, and I get a monthly email from them to pay for the tuition online. And I'm going online, I'm filling out a credit card, and that's how the, transaction happens. So literally, you wouldn't think that, Montessori is an e-commerce business, but they are, because they're running all their transactions online. I think where things start to kind of really get fuzzy is everyone thinks of e-commerce as inventory, right? That you must have inventory in stock, that you have some sort of a retail location. I think that's another place where it's not, that's not true anymore.
Yeah.
So many business models out there that you might not even have inventory in stock, and you're just actually using a drop shipper to do your fulfillment. So lots of different models in e-commerce. And to the question around, do you start with one particular vertical within e-commerce? I think I would sort of say 80-20 rule, right? Like if you can kind of focus 80% of your business around e-commerce in general, maybe 20% or less starts to become really specialized for certain verticals and what those challenges would be. But you hit it on the head there, Seth. Like start general, really learn the space, and then you can think about, maybe specializing even further into a particular vertical.
Yeah. And then perfect timing in the Q&A, we have somebody asking, what are our thoughts on electronic downloadables, e-commerce such as ebooks, music, etc., downloadables as a niche. I'm a big fan, obviously. I mean, I make a good part of my living based on that concept. What do you think, Parag?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, like I said, it's all e-commerce, right? You simply don't have, think about it as unlimited inventory, right? And then from an accounting standpoint, you're calculating COGS in a very different way, but you don't actually have a physical product to worry about. And it is a good niche. I think there's a lot of different companies out there that provide digital only products, and there are different platforms on which you can do you can sell digital goods, and there's definitely a lot of opportunity there, and you can avoid kind of going into managing inventory. But like as we've been saying sort of from the top here, even if a business is running their inventory and needs to take care of their physical goods, I would not be too worried about managing their accounting or to be able to provide them those advisory services. There's lots of tools, including Webgility, that could really help along the way. So we'll certainly be talking more about that in the next few slides here.
Yep, and to drive the point home one more time here, I've been advancing the slides as we're going. This slide here underscores the very experience I had that got me into e-commerce in the first place. And the short version of the story is I had a client like practically pounding on my virtual door saying, I need you to do my books. And he was a big e-commerce company. And I said, I'm not qualified. I don't do e-commerce. There are people who specialize in this. And he said he had sort of been going around looking for people. He had been through like 4 bookkeepers and nobody seemed to know how to do it. And even though I didn't have the specific e-commerce experience, he'd watched my videos on YouTube. By the way, there's another moral in the story there for all of you folks, that if you start putting videos on YouTube to demonstrate your expertise, it can go a long way to help you get a lot of clients. I built my whole business on it. But this guy practically begged me until finally I said, okay, I'm going to go along with it. And along the way, before I even said finally, okay, is what I have on my screen here, which is that I started asking around some of the accountants that I knew of who specialized in e-commerce, and each one of them told me basically the same thing. I'm up to my eyeballs. I can't take on another stitch. One woman said, I know who you are. I've watched your YouTube videos. I would love to work with you, but I just don't have the bandwidth. So after hearing that so many times, I said, okay, I don't have a choice here. I have to dive into e-commerce. And of course, I saw it as a huge opportunity. It was like, talk about opportunity knocking. It was like screaming at me. Right. And so I told him, as long as you're willing to pay me to learn on you and understand I'm going to probably learn it pretty quickly. I certainly have the fundamentals down. I'm willing to do it. And he was. And we started out at one rate. And over the course of a few years, we started, I think, at like something like $1,500 a month. By the time I was done with him, we were, I think, $5K a month, maybe even more in fees. And then he outgrew me and he built his own internal accounting team, whom I trained to take everything over. Right. So going back to the question, how do you pick a niche? Choose what most people aren't willing to do so that you can achieve what most people will never achieve. I love that quote. It's sort of paraphrased from somewhere else that I read, right? But that's my favorite way of looking at it is choose to be willing to do what most people won't be willing to do, and you'll be able to achieve what most people can never achieve, right?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I would, I think about the word niche and I actually just think about specialization, right? And if you're a specialist and have expertise in a particular area, that's really what sets you apart, right? You can provide generalized services, or you can really pick a category and become really, really great at it. And I think that's how I think you can grow your practice and also be able to charge a lot more for your services.
Yep. And so I'll just repeat, the e-commerce accounting is not complicated. It is detailed, right? And so here's what makes inventory, or I should say e-commerce accounting, complicated. Inventory being the first, right? Sales tax, then we have to deal with multiple sales channels. Although, as we pointed out already, you could start out with somebody who's small and simple enough that they have a single sales channel. Maybe they're just selling stuff on Etsy to start with, right? But this is as complex as it can get, is the multiple sales channels and multiple payment processors, right? And it especially gets tricky when I have the same payment processor and the same account with that processor used across multiple sales channels, because now I really have to have good detailed accounting data flow to make sure that I can account for each sale and then each different payment method to get everything to clear out to the right accounts. And we're going to go through this accounting workflow in a little bit. This is why everybody thinks it's complicated, but let me just really simplify all this for you. Inventory is simple. It's like buying stocks. It's buy low, sell high, right? I want to buy a product for one price. I want to sell it for more than that. And I want to make sure that the spread there times the volume that I'm selling is going to be sufficient to cover my cost of goods sold, as well as all the overhead and selling expenses, so that I can make a profit, right? Now, we can take it one level deeper and say it gets a little more complicated than that when we're actually manufacturing the inventory, meaning, simply put, I have a few different things that I buy, I put them together, add a little labor to it, and boom, I've got a finished product. So now we have a little bit more of a layer of complexity, but not much. And the reality is, if you can understand the first version, the second version gets really easy to put together after that. And then we'll go through this and we'll talk about why the sales tax area can really get simplified, right? But here's my buy low, sell high example, right? This is just laid out for you in a spreadsheet. So I buy some inventory, I buy 100 units, they cost $5 each. My total cost is $500, right? That's my inventory asset. Okay, then I go ahead and I sell them all at $20 a piece. So my total revenue on that is $2,000, right? Gross profit, $1,500. Gross profit percentage, 75%. Markup percentage is 400%, right? And, we can go in, I have my e-commerce course that goes into detail for how the one that usually throws people off is the markup percentage, how to calculate that. But it's actually the revenue divided by the cost, right? And you get that expressed as a percentage. That's how we get 400%. So this is the basic inventory model, right? If you can understand this, you're pretty much 95% of the way there. Okay, now let's look at the next level where we have an assembly to put together. So I'm oversimplifying, of course, for the sake of illustration, but let's say we want to build an airplane, right? So the cockpit's I need one cockpit. It's going to cost me 400,000. I need two front wings at $250,000 each. That's $500,000. The rear wings at 150,000 each. I totally made up these numbers, by the way. I have no idea what it really costs to build an airplane.
I was going to say, that's a pretty cheap plane there, Seth.
Well, it's a small plane. I don't know. All right. But we got some landing gear and then, of course, the cabin, right? The reality is with a real plane, there's an infinite number of little parts, right? But I doubt you're going to be getting any airplane manufacturers as clients. This is just to illustrate that this is what an assembly looks like. We have the different pieces and the quantity of each that we need to complete a unit of the finished product. And from that, we get the total cost, right? And that's it. And then, so now you have that total cost for that one unit, which gets compared to what you've sold it for when the time comes. So from that point forward, it's no different than the initial buy it at one price, sell it at a higher price model, right? That's as complicated as this gets, okay? And then we get to sales tax. And the reality is sales tax is infinitely complex, but my advice to any bookkeeper or accountant out there and any e-commerce client that I've ever had is basically the same. You don't want to get involved in this deep level of compliance around sales tax. The simple answer is you use Avalara or TaxJar or something like that. Let them do the calculations. Let them manage this part of it for you. It is the most boring thing you could ever do. If you've ever had the opportunity to file a sales tax return, please, I'd rather stick 9-inch nails through my eyelids than do a sales tax return. Not to mention the fact that I'm probably going to do it wrong because I'm probably going to miss something somewhere because especially being in California where I am, there are so many different districts that have a separate tax rate that if the client's not willing to pay for Avalara or TaxJar, I'm going to charge them twice what those guys would charge to have to deal with doing it. And that's the way you should approach it on the sales tax. Parag?
Yeah. I mean, bang on. I would actually just ask the inverse question, right? Like, why wouldn't you use an automated service to do your sales tax filing, right? There's not, unless you're a student of the sales tax world and like to get knee deep, just learning all of it. I don't really see why you would not take the help of software that's already figured it out, that's also keeping track of the ongoing changes. I think that the biggest thing I worry about with sales tax is how frequently it's changing as states continue to change their laws and their rules, the rates continue to evolve. And it's also so different state by state. You're also putting, your clients at risk if you're taking the liability of all of that compliance, right, around sales taxes, and it becomes almost an entire discipline where you have to keep track of things and what's happening. So I'd much rather leverage a partner like an Avalara or TaxJar and solve that. So again, you can be more successful in e-commerce if you just kind of build that right tech stack, the set of tools you need so that you're spending your time on doing the stuff that really matters and software is taking care of the rest.
Yeah. And so what you do need to know as a bookkeeper or accountant is, get out of the trenches of sales tax. And at a higher level, it's actually very simple, right? When I sell something, I collect the sales tax. It goes into a liability account. And then I'm probably making, monthly prepayments, depending on what your volume is. You might be making monthly prepayments, then filing a quarterly return, and then kind of reconciling the payments with what you actually owe. So it's basically sales tax payable is a clearing account, right? Money clears into it out of each sale, and then it clears out when you make payments and then eventually file your tax return. That much you need to know so you can make sure that, for example, when you've connected an app between your shopping cart and QuickBooks Online, and to make sure that the way you've mapped sales tax, and we're going to look at how Webgility handles this shortly, the bottom line is you want to make sure you understand enough to be able to make sure that everything's flowing the right way, right? Because you can make a mistake in mapping. Parag?
Yeah, spot on. In fact, I see a question here from Karen, and she talks about how sales channels like Amazon collect and remit your sales tax. Do you actually need to track it separately? The answer is no, and
No.
you're exactly right. And so, large marketplaces like Amazon actually recognize how tedious this all can be, and they've built in capabilities to take care of all of that sales tax management for you. What you want to do though is you want to be able to track what sales tax was collected and how much was remitted. You just want to know what the transaction occurred so you have an audit trail in your books of actually what happened. So you don't actually have to worry about filing and compliance. You just need to make sure that the data is flowing through correctly into your account so you're tracking what occurred. I also sort of think about this as kind of making sure you have the right profitability tracking. Is you're not you don't want to just net out and record your net amounts. You would be grossly under reporting on your total revenue. So just being able to break down what was your revenue, what was your sales tax collected, and how much you remitted in your books is going to be really important.
All right. Thanks, Parag. And then I just answered the question. And for those of you who might have come in late or just don't know, the replay of this webinar will be posted on my website. I'll, of course, send an announcement to everybody with the link once it's ready. Next question, should you be tracking sales tax collected or paid per state or just one sales tax liability account? You're going to really, again, if you're somebody like Amazon is handling it for you, they're going to handle that for you. But if you are somehow managing it on your own, then you'll definitely, well, first of all, QuickBooks Online is going to sort of force you to create a sales tax payable account for each jurisdiction, right? So when I set up sales tax for my company and I'm in California, it's going to set up a California specific sales tax liability. If I also have Nexus in another state, I have to go set that state up and then it will create the corresponding liability. So there you really don't have a choice. It has to be a separate liability account for each state that you collect and pay sales taxes in. And so I mentioned a term Nexus, which is like a fancy term for you have to pay sales taxes in this state, right? The reality is, of all the apps I've seen that kind of track and manage this for you, Amazon just does it for you. They don't really show you a whole lot. You just have to kind of trust that they know what they're doing, and they probably do. Shopify actually uses Avalara on its back end, and they have a beautiful interface. It's something I cover in my e-commerce course where you can see, based on your sales, there's two criteria essentially that will trigger Nexus: the volume of transactions and the sales dollar amount. And so in Shopify, they will show you any state that you have sales in, what your volume and dollar amounts are, and based on that, how close you are coming to having to now file and collect and pay in that state, which goes back to what we have already discussed, which is you're better off relying on these, third-party apps that they just know what they're doing and they have it all built in. It's just not even a good use of your time to sit there having to try and figure this all out.
Right. That's right.
So, all right, let's move on. I'm looking at the question, will I be emailing the recording? So again, I'm going to post it on the web and send a link out to everyone. All right, what's next? Again, we mentioned Avalara and TaxJar, right? And then we definitely want it synced up properly, right? You don't want to have to manually, like, for example, pull data out of Amazon and try and figure out how to, like, if you've ever looked at their biweekly settlement report, I've actually created a pivot table that makes sense out of it, but you don't even want to spend time on that, right? You're better off just, again, using a tool that does it really well. And so I want to talk about Webgility. And over here, we're going to get into an actual demo in a few more minutes, but for this part real quick, I just wanted to show you in a screenshot exactly what it looks like. And so in this example, you can tell from the top right that we're in the Shopify store, right? And so this whole area of settings is specific to each sales channel. So for each sales channel, I'm going to set up the tax line item or product or service that I'm using to map the sales taxes between the sales channel and QuickBooks Online. Parag, do you want to speak to this a little bit?
Yes. You jump right into the app, but yeah, absolutely. I think, sales tax is obviously an area of complexity, and the way we think about, looking at all of the different transactions that are coming in from your e-commerce channels, right at the top, the first thing we like to think about is which sales channel are you going to connect to? From those particular sales channels, the data that's coming in Do you want to take all of the transactions at a detailed level, so track every customer, track every item that was sold? Or alternatively, do you want to summarize all of the information that comes in the form of a payout periodically? Most of our customers actually will do accounting at an individual transaction level. So when you have, transaction level data, or even if you have summary level data, Webgility behind the scenes will aggregate all of the sales tax collected during a period of time, and we'll just record it against the line items. So you actually know what your liability was, and you can do that on a state by state level as well. When we look at kind of different sales channels and how they remit taxes, if you're working with a marketplace that's already taken care of the taxes for you, you can map it to a clearing account. So you just know that that's liability's already been settled for you. Or alternatively, you create a clearing account that's tied to your particular tax agency. And now you know how much you need to remit to a particular agency. But most of our customers will rely on some sort of a third-party service like a TaxJar or Avalara that Seth mentioned, so that they don't actually have to go back and worry about the settlement of that sales tax, and all the remittance just happens behind the scenes.
Yep. Yep. And with, by the way, with Avalara, only because I'm familiar with it more so than TaxJar, you have choices. You can do a plan that's going to do all the work for you, but then you file and pay, and then you can have them do the whole thing where they will take money out of your account, do the filings, and schedule the payments for you, which obviously I'm a fan of doing, having them do the most. I'd rather not have to worry about it, because it's one of those things, kind of like a payroll tax return. If you're late or you screw one thing up, the penalties can be stiff, especially if you're dealing with high volume dollar sales amounts for a client. So
yeah, what's fascinating about sales tax, as Seth, you pointed out, it's usually a question of your revenue or some factor of your volume. So certain states calculate your sales tax liabilities or your nexus, if you are required to pay sales tax in that particular state, based on the overall volume of transactions that you've done in that period, or they do it based on total revenue that you have. And some states, I believe, have a 100 transaction threshold, and some states have $100,000 revenue threshold. And those thresholds are changing over time as those states start to, revisit their tax rules. And at the end of the day, when you actually think about the sales tax piece, it's a state level calculation, but then different states break down the jurisdiction at in fact, even a county level. And so if you start to get into that level of detail of tax mapping, again, you're going to spend just a lot of time trying to figure out what those sales tax liabilities are. And so these third-party tools, I think, really do a great job of keeping track of all of those nuances so you don't have to.
yeah, and you should definitely use them, because your value is much higher elsewhere in terms of, once you have the data compiled and you've got everything reconciled, being able to produce good reports, reliable reports that you can review with your client, that's where you're going to add the most value, right? All of this stuff, the sales taxes, these are inputs, right? And where your value is greatest for the client is in the outputs. It's in the reports that you can run and the information those reports can give you in terms of being able to analyze, what products are selling well, what products are profitable. Quick story on that, just to illustrate that, same one client who kind of forced me into e-commerce. There was one point where I said, the margins on Amazon are so thin that I wonder if we wouldn't be better off trying to push more sales in some of the other sales channels, one of which happened to be eBay. And so he said, I think when you factor in the shipping cost, which is something Amazon takes care of, you're going to find that eBay is actually less profitable. And so I went to work, and there was one main app he used to handle the shipping expense. It was something called Indicia or something like that. And so when I factored those costs in and I kind of tagged them to his eBay class, because I use classes to track the different sales channels so we could see profitability by sales channel. And sure enough, when we factored in the shipping, eBay was not as profitable as Amazon was. And that's the thing about this. Like I've been saying, it's not complex, but it is detailed. And once you get these details dialed in, you can get really, really valuable information, which means you can provide really valuable information to the client. That's where I think your focus should be, not on this compliance stuff like sales tax, right? So we're going to talk now about multiple sales channels. And really quick, let's answer the couple of questions that are in the Q&A, and then I want to actually, Parag, have you share your screen in a couple of minutes and kind of take us through how beautifully Webgility handles the sales channels, which leads me into, one of the questions, which is I've seen a lot of advertisements for A2X. Would this be a helpful app? Does this have the same features as Webgility? So I'm going to be honest, I can't speak to A2X, especially in its current state recently. I did look at it years ago, many years ago, at which time they only did Amazon. And for that reason, I was out because I needed something that could handle multiple sales channels, not one. I know they've evolved a lot since that. So I can't really tell you if it handles it better than Webgility or not. I can tell you that the reason I have Parag here and the reason Webgility is the only app I feature in my e-commerce course is because, as you're going to see in a minute, this is my opinion, of course, but how beautifully Webgility handles the e-commerce accounting workflow. And really quickly, I'll explain what that looks like and so that you understand how the app needs to plug in, and then you'll understand why Webgility plugs in very well. So multiple sales channels. You might have Amazon, your website, which is going to use whatever shopping cart it has on our back end. Let's say it's Shopify, right? Then maybe you have eBay. So let's say you have 3 sales channels, right? Amazon, Shopify, and eBay. Each of those sales channels, when the sales come in, you basically need to credit an income account, which is going to happen based on whatever product or service was purchased and how that's mapped in your chart of accounts. So you're going to get your credit to the income account based on that. The debit, even though the sale is happening and the payment happens immediately, we almost have to treat it like a receivable so that we can clear things through in the right way. Because again, we have multiple payment methods across multiple sales channels. So we have to be able to factor in and account for the fact that as we're building our accounting system, I can't foresee exactly which sales are going to, be paid for with which payment method, right? So for each sales channel, I need a sales channel clearing account. For each payment method, then I need a corresponding payment method clearing account. So the sales come into the sales channel clearing, credit income, debit the sales channel clearing, which is an asset. It's a receivable. Then when the payments get applied, the payments come in and they credit the sales channel clearing and debit the payment method clearing. Then we can clear out any fees like PayPal or whatever. And then it clears from the payment method clearing into the bank account at the proper net amount and based on however it sweeps. So Amazon's going to sweep it based on that 2-week close settlement period they have, right? PayPal, you can actually call them and put it on autopilot. Not a lot of people know that. Otherwise, you're going to go in there yourself every few days or whatever and sweep it out. I always tell clients, don't leave money in PayPal. It may look and act and walk and talk like a bank account, but it's not, and it's not insured. So get your money out of there. Don't leave it sitting in PayPal. Right. And then Shopify can be housing any number of payment methods, including Amazon Pay, which really makes it fun when you're trying to clear all this stuff out, because now you have payments showing up on your Amazon settlement report that don't apply to any sales that happened on Amazon. They apply to sales on Shopify. So that's a whole other layer of complexity that we won't be able to get into today. But just so you have an idea of how complex this can get. But again, it's not really complex. It's just detailed. It's understanding the flow. And so going back to the question of, whether this app is good or that app is good, the reason I love Webgility, as you're going to see, is based on how beautifully Webgility lets you have all the flexibility you need to map each and every sales channel to its own clearing account and each and every payment method to its own clearing account. So everything flows beautifully. And bottom line, each of these clearing accounts, if you wanted to, can be reconciled to Xero every single month or every single sales period, which is, in my view, how you make it bulletproof. The simple formula: sales minus payments equals 0. So I should be able to reconcile each of these clearing accounts on that basis to $0 every month if I wanted to.
Yeah, I appreciate all of the great words about Webgility, but I can actually speak to A2X. They're a competitor of ours, and I can tell you they have a great application as well. The way that I like to articulate what A2X does is A2X is great, I think, at doing summary entries. So if you're actually looking at just a summary of, and they don't support all of the different sales channels, but for certain set of sales channels, they're fantastic. They support summary recording of data based on payouts. So say Amazon, if you're working with an Amazon seller, they go through a settlement period and they give you a deposit every 2 weeks. And every 2 weeks, if you want to just lump sum, get a summary of all the transactions at a very high level line item and then create a journal entry, that's, I think, a really good, simple solution. Webgility provides summary entries as well. So we support all of those use cases that A2X and several of the other apps in the marketplace do. But what we also provide is the ability to do things at a transaction level. So if you have a client that actually has a decent sized business and they sell on multiple channels and they want to actually see things as they occur, right? Like if an order happens today, you don't want to wait 2 weeks to record it into your books. And so if you want to see your business in near real time as orders flow in and you want to record the revenue and track the fees that are being deducted on an ongoing basis, you need something much more robust and that can handle all of the complexity of different channels. So as Seth pointed out, depending on the number of channels that you sell on, you want to be able to map each sales channel to each set of clearing accounts that you have created in your accounting system. And Webgility is able to handle all of that complexity. And something that we haven't talked about a whole lot yet, but to point out is that we provide free white glove onboarding as part of all of our plans to our customers. So on the one hand, we understand that you need to have a lot of flexibility with your application, but e-commerce can be daunting, both for yourselves as accountants and bookkeepers. So we also provide kind of free training collateral. I know Seth has also helped us with build out a lot of training materials on our software. So we provide a lot of training for both accountants and bookkeepers who are part of our network, but we also help our merchants really onboard seamlessly with our apps through our onboarding services. So something that we're excited to offer. Seth, let me know whenever you'd like. I have a dummy account here. I can kind of give everybody a little bit of an overview of the application. But to your big question about multiple channels, this is one thing that also stands out to me is that most e-commerce businesses start off with one channel, right? They start to experiment with how they can get selling. What does a workflow look like? How am I going to get my orders? How am I going to do fulfillment? What happens to inventory? How do I correspond with my customers? How do I do marketing for my products on this particular channel? What's it going to cost me? How profitable is it going to be? There's just a lot of questions, and those questions can really be answered when you dive into one channel and you start to figure that out. Over time, as your business grows, you'll realize selling on just one channel can be extremely limiting. A single channel can be incredibly competitive. And I like to say all the time, it's incredibly easy now to sell on Amazon, but it's really, really hard to actually make money doing it. So there are millions of sellers on Amazon, but I assure you it's very few, a very small percentage that are actually making money doing it. In fact, last statistics I read were that of the millions of sellers, there are only 50 or 60,000 sellers. Of the millions, there's only 50 to 60,000 sellers that make over $100,000 of revenue.
Wow. In a month.
In a year.
In a year. Wow.
Yes.
Wow. That's
Again,
crazy.
it's really easy to sell online. It's really, really hard to make money while doing it, which is another reason why, tech is so important. Having software is so important because your margins are razor thin. There's so much competition and it's getting easier and easier to sell online. So you got to really find kind of where you can save on costs. Quickly answering a question. Does this work for Canadians? Yes, we do work with QuickBooks Online Canadian version. We have another question, Seth. I'm happy to take that one. It says, we have a client who got a loan from Shopify, and they're deducting payments before remitting the net amount to their client's account. So we don't actually have a bunch of clients with Shopify Capital, is what I'm going to assume that they're using. I wish I had a really good answer for you here, but Shopify usually does a detailed payout report. And if the payout actually shows you what those capital deductions were, we should be able to handle it. But please don't hold me to it. That's a really good question. Reach out to our support team. I think they'll be better equipped to kind of walk you through what that Shopify settlement looks like and make sure that we're accounting for specifically if a customer has a Shopify lending account.
Yeah, and generally speaking, Shopify has amazing reporting, so you should be able to get in there easily enough. And if need be, reach out to their support to guide you as to exactly where to go to download the right report that will break it down for you so you can see exactly how much was taken out and what the split is between fees, interest, and principal so that you can make sure that all gets booked right on your balance sheet, especially with the right loan amount remaining. And of course, the interest and fees go into the P&L. So
Exactly right. Seth, let me know when's a good time.
yeah,
I'm
let's
happy
do it.
to.
Share your screen and let's walk
Okay.
people through. I want you to all really think about that workflow I described in terms of everything has to go through the sales clearing accounts, from sales clearing to payment clearing, from payment clearing to the bank account. Keep that workflow in mind as Parag takes you through this.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I spend a lot of time actually with our team and lots of time talking to customers and to sort of just demystify everything, right? It's about money coming in and money going out. That's the simplest way I can articulate this. And that's really the art of accounting as well, right? Like you're really just talking about revenue and expenses. So what I'm sharing with you is a simple view of our transactions tab. This is where we look at all of the orders that came in. So I'll just pull up one demo transaction. But basically what Webgility does is Webgility will go at an order level, or we can do it at a summary payout level. With this particular Shopify demo account, I'm looking at things on a per order basis. So simply, Webgility brings in every single order. It brings in the shipping collected. This particular sample doesn't seem to have sales tax collected, but it would be give you the breakdown of all the line items, the shipping that was collected, and the total revenue. It tells you what the billing shipping details were for that customer. And simply you take the order, and at the click of a button, you can post the order to QuickBooks, or there's an automation service that can run every 15 minutes or so. As the orders are coming in, it'll automatically push those orders into your QuickBooks accounting system. If an order is posted and a refund occurs against it at any point in time, we also track the refund. And obviously there's a difference in timing. So the order comes in on, the August 28th, but then the refund happens, say, August 31st. We will create the income entry and then we'll actually refund against it. So if the original entire order was refunded, we'll just wipe out the total money collected. But in your accounting system, you have a track of when money came in and when money went back out. Webgility can also connect to your shipment, and it'll behind the scenes also connect to Shopify's payment processor. So if you say use a ShipStation or Shipping Easy to process your shipping labels, Webgility will also then figure out what was the shipping cost. So say an order came in and you shipped it out with ShipStation, it'll automatically match up the order number. It'll know what the shipping cost is, and it'll record the shipping cost for you as a bill. So you actually know what the expense associated with that was, along with the payment fees. You're really getting very granular order level tracking of how much money was made, which product was sold, who bought the item, what sales tax was collected, what kind of shipping fees did you incur, what your shipping costs were. And then that gives you really that granular tracking. Before I dive into some of the other pieces, I just want to actually show you what this looks like behind the scenes. So as a user on a daily basis, you could be logging into the app and just selecting orders and posting them, or you can just set it up in automation. Behind the scenes, what the accounting piece and the setup looks like, and Seth shared a couple of screenshots of this. But the first thing what we really care about is, do you track inventory and individual orders in QuickBooks? If you're tracking inventory and you want individual order level detail, then you're going to record each simple transaction into your accounting system. And if you're not doing fees, you want to summarize the transactions and just wait until a daily payout occurs. For example, with Shopify, it occurs daily at the end of the day, whereas with Amazon, it occurs every 2 weeks. So going into some of these details, when you have a transaction that comes in, and this is specific to Shopify, I have a demo store here that's connected to a number of channels. So it is a multi-channel application. If you sell on more than one channel, you'll just connect all of them into Webgility, and then behind the scenes, set up the configuration for each channel as you see fit. In this particular case, basically what I have is I can use a single transaction type. So I can decide for this particular channel, all of my orders are going to flow through as a single transaction. And I can control down to the field of memo. Like, what do I want the shipping date to be? I can set the transaction date as the date the order was placed or the date the order was shipped.
One
I won't-
important detail on this, Parag, if you don't mind.
Please.
If you are at all concerned that you need to report things on an accrual basis or in compliance with GAAP, that needs to be the shipping date, because that's going to be the date that the income gets recognized. I've run into this with clients where they were getting financing and we had to restate a lot of things because they weren't doing it that way. So really, really important piece right there.
Bang on. And in fact, something that really jumps out oftentimes is these look like sort of different settings, but ultimately they're all tailored to your business model. And so understanding how you do accounting, and even with something that I think most people don't recognize, to your point about accrual, is that in the world of commerce, technically, you're not actually allowed to collect money until the order is shipped. That's usually not what happens.
Right.
Most businesses tend to actually collect the money up front and they wait for the settlement and they try to ship the order out the same day. But typically, to your point, the shipping date is when you're supposed to collect the money from your buyer. But I could spend obviously a lot of time going into the details of this. But to Seth's point, you can select and create the same transaction type for each order, or you can do different rules for your transactions. So you can decide, I can create different transactions based on their payment methods. So something that's, say, paid by Visa, or say manually via the phone, or you're collecting some sort of a third party. These drop downs, by the way, these tabs are all automated based on whatever's configuration you have in your online channel. So in this particular one, we had a couple of items called default or manual. But for each payment method, so if you're collecting it via a credit card, you can select the transaction type. You can do a sales receipt or an invoice. You create your deposit to account. You decide what the payment method is that's going to get recorded. It can be credit card in this particular case. You can determine how to record the transaction, what the numbering schema is. You either just collect the order number from the online store and match it to your QuickBooks account number, or you can actually set it as the auto-incremented number that QuickBooks does. You can set the transaction date, the shipping date, figure out what goes into the memo. How do you record your product descriptions, the email field? There's just every level of detail that you can find that can be done at a payment method level. You can do different transaction types based on order status. You could do different transactions based on currency. So if you're selling online and you sell different currencies in different geographies, you can configure those. You can also select it based on payment status. So if you're a wholesaler and you'd like to actually have different types of statuses in your store, where for wholesale transactions, maybe you like to place everything in pending and you collect the monies over, a certain period of time, we can create invoices in those instances, and then you can do a payment remittance at the end. So lots of different options as far as how you can configure your transactions. If you're doing transactions, you're obviously keeping track of each product. So you can also do product mapping. Lots of customers tend to have their catalogs all a little bit in disarray, where you'll have products in your online channel that don't actually match up with products in QuickBooks. And I'll talk a little bit about that here in a second. But we can do product mapping. And if products don't exist, so if you start with like a clean QuickBooks and you've actually not created your product catalog there, Webgility can automatically help you create that product catalog as well. Similarly, if you like, you can do detailed customer tracking. So every customer that bought, you can track them, or you can actually use a standard customer and you just say, hey, for every customer, just say it was bought by Shopify demo. So if you're not doing detailed tracking in your QuickBooks with each customer, you could just choose a default name.
And by the way, on that note, my recommendation always with my clients has been, you create a customer based on the sales channel. You do not need every individual customer who places every single order populating in the customer list in QuickBooks Online. I don't think that data is useful, but I do like having each individual order come in as a sales receipt, because to me that data is very useful, because again, as I said earlier, it goes back to being able to run reports. And when I run reports, if I have all the individual orders coming in for each product that I've sold, I can get detailed reporting right in QuickBooks Online about all of the products and how they sold across all of the sales channels. If I choose to do the summary method, then I'm going to have to go outside directly to the sales channels and their respective reporting systems, download it, and then somehow consolidate it to get that kind of information. So something to keep in mind when you're thinking about setting all this stuff up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know we've talked a lot about sales tax, but if you have discounts, you can map to a particular Shopify discount line item. You can keep track of all of your sales taxes, and all the taxes collected just get recorded as is from your online channel into your line item. And again, notice I'm doing this specifically for this channel. So to Seth's point, you can set up each of these settings on a per channel basis. When refunds come in fact, again, if you're doing accrual accounting, you might have a different methodology for this, but you can actually create credit memos or actually create a refund receipt. So you have very granular control over what happens for each channel. And as I mentioned, we also connect to Shopify's payment processor. So we'll collect all the payment fees, and the payment fees can be recorded as a line item. So you're just netting it out for simplicity's sake, or you can actually create a separate account, and that account you can set up as either a payment expense, or you can create a bill, mark the bill paid. You know exactly which account that maps into. So all of these details you have complete control over, both for payment fees and for shipping fees that you might have incurred. This is at a very high level how it works with Shopify. I'm going to quickly switch over to an Amazon store. And with this particular channel in the demo, I've just said, okay, record a summary. So what does that summary mapping look like? Instead of tracking the transactions, the discounts, the shipping, and the payment fees, now you're going to just do account level mapping, because what we're doing is for each region you sell on and within Amazon, and you can obviously swap regions out. You basically say, for my sales, deposits and fees and COGS, how do I want to handle them? So for sales, I have a whole set of fees here. Where do I put my account receivables? Where do I track my sales income? And by the way, if you haven't created these accounts already this will pre-populate all of the accounts that are in your QuickBooks. Specifically, I know there was a question around QuickBooks Online. So this is 100% compatible with QuickBooks Online. It brings in all of your QBO related items. And based on those accounts, you can do your mapping, or on the fly, you can also create an account from here and it'll create it in QuickBooks for you. All of your income, your discounts, coupons, your shipping expenses, taxes, there's even class tracking here. So for each channel, to Seth's point, if you like to keep your different sales channels in a different, group them by transaction class, it's sort of a loosely categorization field in QuickBooks. You can do that. And you can also select a specific customer for all of your transactions. Going into deposits and fees, similarly to what you were doing with sales, all of your carried balance, your reserve accounts, your shipping and your FBA fees, your other selling fees or cost of advertising, all of those detailed fees will get recorded. These are all going to match. And this can get really, really detailed if you like, because Amazon sends you, hundreds of line items of different fees. They can all default to other income or other fees, but you can kind of configure them as well.
Parag, before you move on, because there's a question in the chat that ties right back to this. And I actually have a question myself about when you do the summary method, let's say for Amazon, does it summarize all of your daily sales, or does it wait until the settlement period's over and then post a summary of the whole settlement period?
It waits until a settlement occurs. So,
okay, so you won't see sales coming in as they happen, right? Next question, and Misty's asking this in the chat, with the Amazon Reserve, right? So the Amazon Reserve, every settlement period, they look to maintain almost like a security deposit. They keep money on hand to cover for chargebacks and other kinds of things. That goes into a reserve account. I can't tell you how many times I've seen bookkeepers record that piece of the settlement report as an expense, which it's not. It goes to an asset account. It's escrow. It's money that's owed to you. So the question is, she says, They pay out every 2 weeks, but also hold a portion based on seller experience and amount of sales. It's suggested to update every 2 weeks with Webgility and QBO when dealing with Amazon. So I think that goes back to my answer is going to go back to what I said before. I prefer to do the daily summary method so that I have real-time data coming into QBO, and so those escrow amounts does it handle the escrow amount daily too? I guess it.
No. So what we do, again, for specifically the Amazon marketplace, what we prefer and the way that it's set up by out of the box is we prefer to record Amazon sales on a settlement period basis, but Webgility is bringing in orders as they occur. But when a settlement occurs, unfortunately, I actually don't have this in my demo account. Note, Amazon actually doesn't give you a good sandbox. But basically, let me see if I can find a posted one here. I don't seem to have it in my demo account. But basically, the way that Amazon handles your settlements, it occurs approximately every 2 weeks. You want to bring in your transactions as they occur, but with Amazon, if you're going to do summary posting, you want to do them only when the settlements occur. Part of the reason being is because you're not actually going to know your reserve balance on a day-over-day basis, because on a daily basis, tends to also be a timing issue. Certain transactions may be held in reserve longer than other transactions because of fraud risk. So it's not 100%. It doesn't always match up exactly. So if you're going to do our preference, our recommendation is to do one or the other. If you're going to do Amazon if you want more real-time information, you should do tracking for every single transaction with Amazon. Right. So when the transaction comes in, we're tracking all of the revenue. And when the settlement occurs, that's when we're going to reconcile all of the income that you had. You keep all of your transactions in a clearing account. We're going to net out all of the fees. And then we know what your reserve is. So you know what the reserve at Amazon is and the reserve that nets out in your books.
Right. And then to Linda's question in the Q&A, can we set up Webgility to bring in a daily sales summary with inventory out for each sales channel? The quick answer to that is when I set my sales channel up in Webgility, I'm going to choose to map the products and services. So assuming those products and services in QuickBooks Online are set up as inventory parts where quantities are being tracked, then as soon as the sale hits using that product or service, it's going to deduct the corresponding quantity out of inventory and push the related cost into cost of goods sold.
Yes, and to a related kind of question here, we've had a lot of accountants ask about, to this particular question as well, instead of recording every single sale, why not wait until the end of the day, consolidate? So we actually have the ability to consolidate, but I can tell you it usually doesn't work out really well. What we suggest is choose the two ends. If you want transaction level detail because you're doing inventory tracking in QuickBooks, record every transaction. If you don't track inventory in QuickBooks, then you can do summary entries, but then you're not going to get the summary until the end of the day or the end of every settlement period. So choose kind of the two versions of it. Most of our customers do post every single transaction because they leverage QuickBooks for a lot more than just, hey, just close my books up at the end of the month. They look at QuickBooks as a source of truth. How do you know what kind of cash flow you have? If you're just going to rely on your bank balance, maybe that's one way to do it in a simplistic way. But if you're actually keeping track of profitability, you're tracking your cash flow on a daily, weekly basis, having all of your transactions flow in, you can't wait until a 2-week settlement occurs from Amazon to figure out what happened to your business. No. So transaction level detail is usually what works out best. And to Seth, your point, you can do transaction level detail, have the inventory track, but not worry about every single customer. And lots of customers of ours actually like to have even the customer record in QuickBooks, because then they can go back and reference things like how often is that customer bought. If they don't actually have a third party, say, marketing tool, they can leverage QuickBooks to actually answer that, especially now with QuickBooks' partnership or now product into it has called MailChimp. You can do email marketing out of your QuickBooks. And so the more you know about the customer inside QuickBooks, the better handle you have of even marketing to them. I know a part of the application, product I did not jump into was the product catalog. But what Webgility does is also keeps track of all of your items. So we actually know, given your entire product catalog, how many of them, what products do you have? So this is telling you total number of products that you have, how many products are missing in QuickBooks, and how many of them are available in your store. And so if they're missing in QuickBooks, you can just hit create and it'll bulk create all of those products in QuickBooks for you. Once those products are created, if alternatively you prefer to just map them, you can also say, hey, I don't want to create this product because my SKU in my online store is different than what I have the product name in QuickBooks, because QuickBooks is really, really rudimentary when it comes to inventory management. You can also do a mapping. So we give you actually a mapping template. And so you can export all your products out, map them in bulk, and bring it back in as an import if you like. You can also just map it one by one. So I just click on map and it'll just connect to QuickBooks and it'll give me a particular mapping to do. Also, once you've been able to map your products and your catalog matches up, the next thing is inventory and pricing. So beyond accounting, and as we mentioned at the top of this webinar, this could all be easy, right? So one of the big reasons why accountants don't like to deal with QuickBooks and e-commerce merchants is because inventory can get complicated. Well, we provide all the tools to get your inventory catalog set up and mapped. Once every match is, once all of your transactions, all your products are matched up, now on an ongoing basis, we will automatically keep the inventory levels updated. So say an item sells on Amazon, you want to update your Shopify store, Amazon transaction comes in, it'll sync to QuickBooks, and QuickBooks inventory will get updated into your Shopify's channel. And so this particular case, it's not just inventory, but we're also able to manage pricing. So if you have, the right prices set up, you can update your prices once in QuickBooks and it'll update your prices across all of your channels. Before someone asks this question, I'll actually jump ahead and say, this is an area we're investing a lot in. So going forward, we're actually working on multi-channel pricing rules. So you can set a particular price in QuickBooks, but then set different markups in different channels. You can also do inventory allocation. So right now it's a one-to-one. So whatever inventory is in QuickBooks is the inventory that you have in your online channel. But going forward, you'll be able to do an allocation. You'll be able to say, I've got 100 widgets in QuickBooks, but I want to sell half and half, 15 Amazon, 15 Shopify. So lots of cool capabilities in regards to products. And last but not least, I'll quickly show you what the analytics tab in here looks like. Once you've connected your channels, once you have things set up and running, most of our merchants really like to just let the automation take care of the syncing and periodically check it just for auditing. But what's beautiful about it is you can still come into the app and look on a daily basis, kind of what's happening with your trends. And so we tell you everything from your gross sales, average order value, top performing products. The more channels you connect, the more insights this will have. Tells you kind of what happened this month, what happened today. It also gives you comparisons. So how you're doing month over month, how you're doing year over year, year to date, month over month. Just a lot of fascinating insights here that you can get once all your channels and your data is flowing through. Maybe one quick other piece I'll talk about is connections. So as I mentioned, it's a multi-channel app. So you can kind of decide, hey, here's my accounting, here's my sales channels, what my payment processor is, what I'm using for shipping. And depending on all of those things, it'll automatically kind of bring it all together into the dashboard. And since most of the audience here also work with end users, you could actually invite yourself or add yourself as a different role. So you can create an additional, the unlimited users are supported. So you could be a primary user and then invite your accountant as well. They'll just get an email invite, they'll log in, and we provide audit trails so we know which account logged in when. And you could also do two-factor authentication to make sure that it's fully secure. And ongoing basis, the application's obviously updated. It's SaaS, so you don't have to worry about it. But, we do announcements and so forth in app like most other, what's standard out there in the industry. But happy to dive in. I know there's a few more questions coming in.
Yeah.
Seth, let me know if you want me to go any deeper or we can go back to
Let's tackle some of these questions for a minute. And I also want to mention, going back to what you were saying, Parag, about the ability to map your products, where I want to make sure everybody here, especially since most of the people here are accountants and bookkeepers who are going to be serving clients who do this. This is really important to keep in mind. It came up in my very first experience with that same client I've referred to who, got me into e-commerce. What I noticed at one point was I had his all of his inventory parts set up in QuickBooks Online. One of the first things I did was I went through and cleaned up that list so that we had just one example of each product that he sold. When I started comparing it to what he had in his sales channels, I noticed that there were many, many more SKUs than what QuickBooks Online showed. And when I asked him about it, he explained to me that it was an SEO strategy. So he might have 6 different SKUs for the same product in Amazon because each version has a different description written, designed to attract a different search kind of query, right? And so what I quickly realized then was that I needed exactly this kind of functionality where we were able to take the 5 or 6 different SKUs in Amazon and map them to a single SKU in QuickBooks Online. And in order to build that, I started out by building a spreadsheet so I could see very clearly, because this guy had hundreds and hundreds of SKUs. He had a ton. I once asked him,
I do in my demo store. Yeah.
Yep. I remember once asking him, because he came to me at first, I thought he was specializing in selling like lock boxes for realtors. That was what he started out with. At this point, he was selling Huggies and garbage bags and all kinds of stuff. And I asked him, and he was a funny guy. He was a guy from Brooklyn, New York, and he talked like the way, stereotypical guys from Brooklyn talk. So I said to him, I said, I don't understand. I thought you sold lock boxes. And he says to me, I sell whatever sells, boss. It's hilarious. But, so I wanted to make that point though, about the importance of understanding that mapping process, that you may encounter this. In fact, you likely will encounter this, especially with the more savvy e-commerce merchants who understand about SEO. And that's how important that is. I mean, this guy, by the time he outgrew me, he was doing $1 million a month in monthly revenues. So most of that was on Amazon. So let's go through some of these questions. So the first one, Z is asking, she was introduced to Webgility 6/24/20. It's her understanding it was completely focused on e-commerce with inventory, but the way you're speaking, might understand it can be used for applications without inventory. Stopping right there, the quick answer is yes, because as I said earlier, it's all about the products that you're mapping in Webgility. You could set those up as non-inventory parts, or even service items, so that they represent a digital product or anything that doesn't track inventory. Doesn't matter. You're just deciding how to set it up in QBO and linking it, in the mapping in Webgility. Webgility just has to pull the sales and know which item to ding. Once it dings that item, if it's not a quantity tracking type of product or service, it's still going to work just fine. So definitely can use it even if there's not inventory to be tracked. Or as Misty mentions in the chat, let's say you have a bunch of one-off products. You don't want this ever-growing list of SKUs everywhere. So just create some generic product, or maybe a list of them if there's some way to distinguish like groups of products. But that's how I would set that up in QBO. So you can still download daily orders so you have the data that you need. But this way, you're not cluttering up this ever-growing list of one-off products in your QuickBooks Online list.
Yeah, I think the key again is it actually does not matter what product type it is. If it's digital versus physical, it's just as long as it's a compatible sales channel. So if they're using Shopify, they're using WooCommerce, they're using BigCommerce, Etsy, Wix, most of the channels we're compatible with, then the product type that's sold, we can take care of that without an issue.
Right. Real quick, off to the side a bit, there's a question in the chat: does Webgility integrate with Xero?
That's a great question. So we do integrate with Xero. We don't currently support it. We decided actually about a year ago to focus on QuickBooks and QuickBooks Online. There was just a lot of change happening in the QuickBooks ecosystem, as many of you also probably know about all the transition that's happening from QuickBooks Desktop to QuickBooks Online. And so we decided to focus our engineering efforts on QuickBooks. And so we've been building a lot of capabilities around the QuickBooks ecosystem, but we will be building those same capabilities for Xero and leveraging that platform work that we've done over the last year back with Xero. So expect early next year, we're going to reopen our pipeline and start to be supporting Xero as well.
Great. Next question, do accountants typically set up Webgility for their clients as a value-add service, or are they managing the client's books using Webgility directly? The way I've done this is, as Parag mentioned earlier, they have an amazing onboarding process. You're going to get a dedicated person from Webgility who's going to get on a Zoom with you and walk you through the whole setup. They're going to get all your sales channels set up, all your payment methods set up, all that stuff that Parag just walked you through. They're going to help you set up. And then they stay with you for a couple of weeks after. So if you have follow-up questions, you have a dedicated person who's there to help you. Then once it's sort of confirmed that your setup is complete, they will bid you farewell, but then you just go through the normal support channels. And I'll say this, in my e-commerce course, shortly after I'd launched it, somebody was struggling with something with Webgility. And I actually told her, I said, I know you probably don't like this answer on the surface, but trust me and go with me on this. Reach out to their support. Their support's amazing. She chimed in a little bit later saying, I've got a Zoom call scheduled with somebody from Webgility for later today. I've never seen support like that from an app. Same day, within a few hours, on a Zoom, sharing screen so that we can quickly get to the bottom of the issue and get it fixed. And a few hours after that, she confirmed it was fixed. So that's another big benefit to, working with Webgility. I think I even asked you once, Parag, like, I would think a lot of app developers probably don't do that level of support because they're afraid it's going to cost them a lot of money. But I'm guessing you've probably found that actually saves you money in the long run to be able to provide that kind of quick and really good support.
Yeah, you're spot on. I mean, what's fascinating about e-commerce, I mean, I know we're talking to bookkeepers and accountants here, but man, for small businesses, it can be scary, right? Like small businesses don't want to mess up their books. And so it's really important that we build trust with them, and it's really important that we're along the way with them as they're onboarding. So I mean, last year we in fact got together as a leadership team, and we had this real debate around, can we afford to provide white glove onboarding to every customer? And we said we can't afford not to, like we just have to do that so that we can really help merchants as they're onboarding. Because to your point, something we also recognize with small businesses is that most small to medium-sized businesses don't sort of keep all of their channels the same. They don't keep things clean. They're not actually even ready for automation. They prefer to work with a person, right? That's the audience here, right? Like we could probably ask another poll. How many of you actually pick up a client that's got their books clean?
None, zero. I can already tell you the answer.
So, they don't do it in a simple way. And that's why the initial hurdle is just even getting your books ready for automation. So it's not just software, it's being able to set things up in a way. And so support's really, really key. Yeah.
Probably causes a lot less support requests in the long run. So going back to the original question, my preference when I'm working with a client and onboarding Webgility is to do it with them. I usually will have a meeting with the client ahead of time so we can talk about some of the issues that we've raised today as far as understanding what's our accounting method, and understanding what are our sales channels. Like we kind of map it out off of Webgility first so that we go into it knowing exactly what to tell the person from Webgility in terms of what we need set up and how. That makes that call go much more smoothly. But as the accountant, I like to do it together with the client. That's my version of white glove support for my client is, just providing that and saying, I'm going to do it with you because they know their business operations really well. They may not know the accounting. I know the accounting really well. So I feel like we need both of those heads in the meeting to make sure that everything gets set up perfectly in Webgility.
Yeah, and the only other way to answer that I would say is like, what is your role, right? Like if your role with the customer is to just periodically check in and just close their books, then I would actually get them set up, let them get their transactions and so forth running. To your Seth's point, be involved early on in the onboarding, and then let them work directly with Webgility for ongoing kind of help or anything they need. But if your role is an advisor and you're actually managing their transactions on an ongoing basis, giving them value add e-commerce advisory, then you're more than welcome to use it behind the scenes and then just let them, have access to QuickBooks and be able to see the outcome instead of having to deal with the actual application themselves.
Right. Now, Karen asks, I have an e-commerce client that records every transaction and every customer. It makes a huge file. How do you get around that? That sounds to me like we're talking about QuickBooks Desktop. And that will be a problem with QuickBooks Desktop that I have not experienced in QuickBooks Online. QuickBooks Desktop, when the file gets large, it will run slow. That's right. It is QBO. So how do you know how big the file is? And bottom line, is it running slow? Because I have not experienced, like I said, I had a guy who was doing $1 million a month with 600 SKUs. I did not experience any kind of slowdown.
Yeah.
So,
and I would, yeah, to your point, I think, QuickBooks Online can handle higher transaction volumes much easier. It's much more optimized for SaaS. There might be something else going on behind the scenes in terms of what they have set up or number of services that they might be connected to that could be slow with QBO. But no, I've not seen kind of customers complain about every transaction. Every customer detail can get interesting and daunting, but realize, I mean, that's the world in which Intuit is moving. So I would sort of hammer on support there and really figure out why things are slow. Because
Yeah.
if you're going to be marketing out of QuickBooks and using MailChimp, for example, for email marketing services, things can be slow. You're going to need your customer details.
The other question is, if you're running into that, are you on QuickBooks Online Advanced? It may be time to go to that, because that's definitely built to handle larger volume of everything. So if you're on like QBO Plus or something, that might be the answer. But like Parag said, I would definitely hammer support on it and say, hey, I need a solution here.
Yep.
And we have a question about pricing. We'll get to that at the end. I always like to save pricing for the end. Linda says that she's going to be contacting you directly, Parag. So get ready for Linda's call. She's coming
to
for
help,
you.
Linda.
Let's see then. What is do you offer annual contracts only? Or I guess these are all pricing questions. Let's hold the pricing questions till the end. I want to get through kind of the rest of the material, and we're running short on time. Actually, we have like 2 minutes left. So let me just bang through a couple of things very quickly here. Let's go down here. So I mentioned earlier about analysis, and I think now you can see kind of why I think it's important to do the individual downloading of the orders so that you have the details. Although Parag did show you the analytics in Webgility might be exactly what you need. So maybe it's not as much necessary if you're going to use something like that, right? I'm going to mention my e-commerce course. I've mentioned it a few times. If you're interested, it's not hard to find, but reach out to me and I'll send you the link in case you're interested in the e-commerce course, right? I want to quickly talk about the analysis, right? And this is a section in my course, actually. So we're not going to get into the details, but this is where if you have good data and everything's flowing beautifully because you're using an app like Webgility that does it really well, now we can focus on this kind of stuff. 4 ways to measure profitability and grow your business. There's different sort of ratios that we want to look at that will help the client make decisions. Using inventory analysis, there's something called ABC analysis. There's other kinds that are covered in the course that will help you understand how to take the data from the reporting, the outputs that you can get, which is, as I said, is where the real value is, and then work with the client to figure out what's selling, how to make sure you don't overstock inventory, how to make sure you don't understock and end up having back orders, which often leads to loss of sales, right? We're going to look, of course, at gross profit, markup, and net margin. That's usually where you start. And all these other analysis are, where you go to later that provide much, much, much deeper value for the client. No, Pat. What is it? Net operating profit after taxes. That's a key number that every e-commerce merchant wants to understand, even if they don't know that they do. Trust me, they do. And then how to calculate marginal cost, which has to do with how much more does it cost to produce each additional unit. This is more for people who are manufacturing their own inventory, right? We talked about multiple payment processors. This is going to be really important because we want to make sure the data flows properly from sales channel to payment processor into the bank account. And there can be any number of things happening in between. Earlier, somebody asked about a Shopify loan. That's just one example of many other things. We also talked about the Amazon Reserve. So there's a lot of little moving parts that can happen in between. Again, not complicated, not rocket science, just detailed, just moving parts that once you understand how they come together, this actually gets really, really easy. And bottom line is, at the highest level, our accounting e-commerce workflow is a clearing account system. So everything runs through clearing accounts, which can be reconciled to Xero. Sales minus payments equals 0. Okay. I'm going to kind of rip through this. A lot of it is stuff that we already said. The slides are going to be provided with the replay. Right. I kind of want to, we wanted to talk maybe a little bit about AI, but considering everybody started off by saying they don't have a lot of experience, this is probably getting too far ahead. But you'll have the slides and you'll also have a detailed write-up where I've written about some of the AI implications. A lot of it has to do with really optimizing your supply chain and getting really good real-time data around your workflow. So what does the e-commerce industry look like in 5 years? We'll do another webinar and we'll talk about that. Okay. And now we can talk about pricing. But before we got into pricing, I wanted to make sure that you all could see this. We have 2 different promo codes that you can use for Webgility. So Parag, you want to talk about pricing for a couple minutes and then explain the promo to everyone?
Yeah, absolutely. So, very transparent pricing. Just visit webgility.com and click on the pricing tab, and you'll see what our prices are for QuickBooks Online, for our Webgility Online product, and Webgility Desktop solution as well. If you're selling on a QuickBooks Desktop product, pricing starts at about $59 a month. No, you don't have to sign up for an annual contract. You can also be month to month. We also have a money back guarantee. So once you do sign up and on board, if you think that it doesn't work out for you, it's not a problem. Those 2 promo codes, Nerds25 off MO and off Fan, those are the 2 different annual and monthly pricing plans. So you'll get 25% off the first year on a monthly billing cycle, or 25% off also on an annual cycle. You could just enter that promo code on the checkout once you've selected to buy a plan. We also have a partner program, obviously. And so if you go to our website and want to become a partner, just click on the tab that says Accountants Partner Program. Go ahead and fill out your information to become a partner, or if you want to refer a client. We do provide discounts to our partners, and we also have a training program so we can walk you through. And of course, Seth does a fantastic job of also training folks through his community on Webgility as well. So yeah, happy to work with you. And my contact information is openly available, but just visit webgility.com and we're happy to help.
Beautiful. All right. Our time is up, but I can stick around for a couple more minutes if there's any other questions. I think we answered all the ones that were sitting there in the Q&A. And when I send out the notification that the replay is up, I'll make sure all this information is included for you.
Awesome.
If you're an accountant, but an Amazon seller, are you able to use the accountant version for your own Amazon store?
Yes.
Yes. All right. All right. Well, it looks like we're just getting comments, Parag, that people really enjoyed it.
Awesome. Great. Hey, thanks for this opportunity, Seth. I hope this was helpful for everyone. And yeah, I know we didn't get to touch on AI. Probably another webinar for another day.
Yeah, we can focus on just that. But like I said, considering everybody kind of answered that they, for those of you who want to stick around for one more quick poll question, the next one was, are you interested in learning about AI? So real quick, if you want to chime in and answer that.
Very cool.
And then I got one more question right after this that we'll throw up. And Parag, if you have to go, I understand.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, Seth. Thanks
Thank you,
everyone for
Parag.
attending, and look forward to sharing everything offline as well. Yep.
All right.
See ya.
Take care. All right. I'm going to stick around because I want to get these other polls up. I'm curious to see what everybody's answer is. It looks like we have an overwhelming amount of people who are interested in learning about the AI implications. All right. So I'll share those results real quick. 77% interested, 23% say too soon, it's already scary. All right, last poll question. Well, never mind, because I was intending on asking that first question earlier and then asking it again. So never mind. We already have the answer as of the end of the webinar. So that's it, folks. You know how to find me if you need me or have any follow-up questions. Like I said, you all get an email with the link to the replay as well as all the information. The slides will be embedded in that replay. I also write up a very, very detailed document, which is what we use to create the slides. That will also be made available to you. So you can really kind of go through everything we covered today, nice and slow, and get into it. And best thing you can do if you're really interested in Webgility is go get a demo with them and/or stick a client in it, and you'll experience the onboarding process. I'm not kidding. I wasn't just saying that because Parag was here. The whole reason he is here is because I've had an amazing experience with this product, both on the back end with the people behind the company, as well as on the front end with the software itself. So I can't say enough good things about Webgility and how easy it's going to make it for you to provide e-commerce accounting services to clients. Oh. All right. Well, if there's no more questions, then I'm going to go have lunch. Have an absolutely fantastic day, everybody.